the schedule was released for the entire season of 2020-24 for VCT, how the main league is going to be running, the two Masters event. Then we have Challengers, Premier, which is now coming in to be the main way that you qualify, with Game Changers at the end of the year. All of the VCT season is going to be compacted basically in the first 6 to 7 months of the year, with both Masters and the championship event ending, I believe, in same time next year. So the end of August. Game Changer is going to be held in November, and then you have like the Ascension Land and Challengers and all that stuff that's going to be happening after the main VCT event finishes. There's already been a ton of commentary around, the season, in terms of the length. Is it too compact? Is the off season too long? There's already been a lot of pro players that have been come out to talk about the season, how they don't really like it. Leo Faria, who we've spoken to a couple times already, has come back out and said how he's already commented publicly about how, if you're winning a lot, all those teams are always going to be complaining because they're always going to be playing stuff. So he's kind of been playfully on the defense, which with some interesting comments the last few weeks, I would say, regarding the off-season schedule and there not being a lot of events. What are your general impressions of the season? Do you think it's in a good place?
So I guess it depends which hat you want me to have on right now. I mean, if I'm a fan, I'm literally greening out when I see this guy. I'm like, this is amazing. Like, we get Valorant year long. Like, this is insane. There's like almost no gaps. I'm going to be pogging out just watching Pro Valorant all year next year. They just packed the calendar with it. If I'm a pro player in VCT, I'm thinking, okay, there's a chance that, I don't make it to these tournaments. Like, what if I don't make it to champions? Then what? My year's over, like almost halfway through, like start of July. I mean, like, you might even know before that. Like, if you're a really bad second stage, in which case I say, honestly, there needs to. That's just kind of how circuits work to an extent. I think they could push champions back a bit to make it better. But I will now go into my next hat, which is the content creator hat. I think with a game like Valorant, the Valorant devs, and I've never spoken to them about this, but I can tell that they take a lot of insights into other esports, specifically Counter-Strike. And Counter-Strike has an open circuit that's just flooded with tournaments. Mm-hmm. Just every single week, tournament. And there's a reason why you see all of these pro CS players turned streamers. I'm not even saying myself, because I actually just switched to Valorant for something very different. But the streamers that started in Counter-Strike, like Shroud, for example, or Tarek, like, it's very, very hard to be a big streamer in Counter-Strike because the pro circuit hogs up all of the viewership consistently, right? It almost takes the influencers out of the category. And if I'm a developer, I need to do something to stop that from happening. And that's the narrative that I think a lot of people in the esports scene just can't seem to wrap their head around, is what's better for the health of the game. And that's the tricky question, right? Like, I think this is a really good compromise that keeps the health of the game alive. So that way, there is a portion of the calendar where I feel like influencers can still have, impact in the Valorant scene, which clearly the Valorant devs care a lot about. They do a lot of influencer events. They just did a lot of them at Champions this year. They did it last year in Turkey. They keep doing them all the time, and that really helps elevate the eyes that are brought to this game. So I think I could complain about the whole VCT schedule, or even, I guess you could complain that Ascension is like before that last section of challengers, which is what's happening there. Actually, I don't even really understand that, but
I don't think the graphic isn't explicitly good in terms of showing like what's going to be happening.
Yeah.
For me, I think you can look at the Counter-Strike scene, as you talked about, like Tarek and Shroud. One of the biggest reasons they stopped playing professionally to stream full time is that the travel schedule in Counter-Strike is insane. It is the most insane of any esport, of any major one esport. You are traveling more of the year than any other game by far, just because of how many tournaments there are.
So not in one spot either. It's not like this franchise league, right? Like you can talk to Nitro or something when he was on Liquid a couple years back. And I remember the number of days they were away from home was like 340 days out of the year, 330 days. It was insane. It was like an absurd number of days, like 330 days out of the year or something like that. They weren't at home. That's incredible, right? It's fucking incredible.
It's unsustainable if you want to have like a life outside of the game.
Yeah.
Or it's very difficult. And that is why everyone has moved to Europe now, because all Pro League is held in Europe for Counter-Strike, and most of the tournaments are in Europe. So if you really want to have the least amount of stress in terms of traveling, you have to live in Europe. And I think that Riot has definitely seen what's happened there, and they don't want to have the same issues. Now, Riot's been the opposite, where they don't have enough tournaments. They don't have enough events. This is something that me and you have both criticized them, for and complained about. There's just not been enough to do, especially in the off season. But it's really hard for me to fault them with the current schedule of this year. They really don't want to overlap things like Game Changers. They want Game Changers and the Game Changers World Championship to have its own unique time slot and for everyone to tune in, to not have that overlap with VCT. And then you throw in Challengers too, and there is really just so much to broadcast that the year is full. Even with how compact it is now, it still is full. So it's hard for me to be too upset with how Riot wants to put the schedule, because I understand their concerns around Challengers and Game Changers and having those events get their own spotlight as well. I still do think it would be I think that like the Red Bull Homegrounds event is going to be great. Like the day after Fnatic got eliminated from Worlds, they signed up to Homegrounds. So you have that Homegrounds event by Red Bull where you have a ton of great teams now. I think like 100 Thieves and like DRX and Fnatic, and that's going to be like a tier 1 tournament. I would love to see Riot, like the event that Riot's going to do with you, that's going to be great. Like the Tired Lugwood event, that is going to be great. So they're going to have stuff. I would like to see one more independent third-party tier 1 event. Like give it to ESL or give it to Blast or do something so that there is at least one more like quote unquote big event in the off season that teams could kind of rally around.
I think, I do agree with that. That would be really cool. Just like I like the one-off events that are out of the circuit, like more so than the actual circuit. Like, it's just such like an element of spice added to the calendar, right? Like where you can have, the teams that didn't make, like when you just said the list and I was like, oh man, like that's sick. That's right. We get teams like 100 Thieves playing against like international teams. Like that's sick. That's sick because they didn't qualify. And I would love to see that, like just see them play like with some of those teams you listed, DRX, Fnatic, like that would be sick to see. Or watching, like M80 play one of these teams, like that would be fucking sick. Or watching V1 from Game Changers, like play one of these teams. That is sick. Like I want to see that. But I do understand like, like there's viewer fatigue, right? Like, sure. Yeah. And like, that's a delicate thing where I'm sure they used I guarantee you they use a lot of like advanced analytics to like figure this shit out. Like knowing Riot, they definitely don't just like throw a dart at a wall, and just like, oh, well, looks like Game Changers this year is going to be in November. That'd be fucking hilarious though if Leo's fucking wall had like 8 dartboards.
At times, it does seem like that is how they do things.
No, it's definitely not.
Gonna lie. Not gonna lie.
I don't know why I set you up for that. That's stupid. But I honestly, I don't blame them. And I think a lot of the changes they made with Premiere are pretty cool. Like, I don't know if you saw that. They're really like, they ramped up Premiere. They're doing like all 7 maps now. It's the qualifier into challengers, and you can find scrims through Premiere, like the map of the week. It's like how old ESEA was in CS, and they're not letting pro players play in it, which is pretty sick. Like no like subs from like Team in One actually was playing in some of my friends' Premiere team this last season. So none of that anymore. And I think that'll be really good for the scene. Like, I think all of this is great for the scene. Like I said, the one concern I have would be the actual VCT circuit. But all of that can be solved if there's good off-season events, like you said. Like, that is the key spice here that's missing, is like these events that allow international competition to form, and we get like this mixture of game changers and challengers and teams that didn't qualify to Masters that still have big fan bases, right? Like, I mean, I don't give a shit if K Corp didn't qualify for shit. Like, I want to see Sideshow fucking mauled when they play 100 Thieves. Like, I would love that. Like, that would be that would make my week, actually, watching that VOD. Like, give me that. Give me that right now, actually. I'll fucking pay money for that. I'll pay a pay-per-view for that game. Yeah.
Don't give Riot any more ideas, please.
Melons, dude. I want to hear him say melons 8 more times. That's all I want. That's all I want, Rod.
He's got to bring one in. I feel like there hasn't been enough real melon interaction.
Dude, they did it for that watch party, the Plat Chat couch back in the day. They broke the melons in the backyard. That was crazy.
That is true.
Yeah. They went hard on those melons.
gotta go hard on those melons. So overall, hard to fault Riot for kind of like for how they're organizing things. I think it is the best of both worlds for right now. I know some players think it's just too much to play really through the season. It's just the grind is just too difficult. I do understand that. There are a number of pro players who have had some tough times adapting this past season. There are a couple players who, I don't want to name anybody specifically, but were considering retiring just based off of the stress of having to move to Los Angeles and to have either to bring their family with them or to have family away from them or significant others, and how that affected like their ability to like play the game. And it actually is more players than you would think so.
Yeah, I heard that a lot in Americas. A lot of the Americas teams really struggled like mentally, like living out there for that long. And I mean, I don't blame them, man. Like, can you imagine what it would feel like being on crew, being like 0-6? Just like, fuck, man, we got to stay out here for another, like, how long? Man, this is awful. Like, Jesus, that would be brutal. That would be so brutal. So I totally get it.
So like that definitely comes into play. I think a lot of these players should be thinking about that next year. Like, if you know how brutal this schedule is and you either had a tough time this past season or you had players that had a tough time, you're trying to mitigate that as much as possible. So the stress levels aren't too high. Is probably going to be super successful for those players going into next year. Because that definitely caused a lot of the issues that we had for a bunch of teams. Was just the stress of living in LA. Yeah.
No, I definitely like, I think that probably hurt Leviathan the most. Like, if I'm thinking about it, like they just didn't look very happy, like living in LA after a while. And even talking to them, they were just so excited to get back. it's rough. Like it has to be super rough. Like the culture shock, just moving across the world for that long, away from your family, especially if things aren't going well within the team, like any kind of disagreements. Those are the only people you know. That's rough. It's like you live with the people you work with. Oof. It's hard. That's really hard. It
is very hard.
Yeah.